Okay students, this is quite an extensive tutorial. What we're going to be starting with is just some behind the scenes. We're going to be looking at how you filmed this before we go into how to use After Effects to produce this. So let's go see the clips. Okay Tom, talk us through the basics of this video experiment. What do we do?
Okay, so I've just set up a tripod and I've just made sure that it's level. So I've used the spirit level to make sure that we have a level shot of the field here. And what we're going to do is we are going to film myself and Carl jumping in. And we've got a nice straight shot here. We also want to make sure that the tripod can be lifted up as well, because we want to get a sky shot for the field. It's really important that we don't just film the jump, we also film just the field itself, so we have a background as well when we put it into our After Effects composition. And we'll show you a little bit of that. We'll get a shot of us jumping first, and then we will get a field shot. Just a couple of things to know. So you can see with what we've framed, we are away from a lot of these trees. Now the reason that is because we want to make sure that there is less stuff that can change over time. So if you've got lots of people walking in, or you've got lots of trees that might change positions, try and avoid those and have a nice clean open space. Okay, so what I'm filming now is just the static shot of the background, so that we can make sure that we have something to put over the composition, and then if we change anything with the jump, we have that as the basis. What we also need to do with our field shot is make sure we have the same movement, so we're just going to tilt up.
We are ignoring the fact that there's lots and lots of leaves blowing around. We have to.
And then when I think I've got enough time to put myself in, I'm just going to bring it down back onto the shot. So it's right back where I left it, so that I can easily put myself or Carl jumping in.
And then push up.
Yeah. Okay, so you should have a jump and a static shot. So now you've got your footage. Make sure you check this back. Check that your footage of the jump and the footage of the shot has the same background on it. If it's zoomed out and zoomed in, you need to redo that shot. You can do the shot before the jump or after the jump. We'll meet you upstairs.
And here is the result of this. Superhero. Look at that, amazing. Okay, let's get into this now. So at this point in time, we have After Effects open. You should be at this stage now. If you're not, just pause and get After Effects open and get to this window. When you're here, what you need to do is you need to create a new composition. Now, none of this matters, really, but you can just change the name of your composition. Notice that there are presets and things like that. You don't really have to touch that. HD is about 2000 pixels, wide, 1920, and a height of 1080. So you've got 1080p. That's where you get that term from. Anyway, we're moving on. Press OK. And you are now in the space. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding some files. So you'll have your own files. I've got a little folder here that I've created called Super Jump, and that's just sitting in the tutorials folder of the media share. You'll be able to find that those files are there if you haven't been able to record your own files, but just for efficiency, you should probably transfer all of your files to the scratch drive, regardless of whether you're using these files or other files. So make sure that you've made a folder within the scratch drive. Here's mine, where I've got all of the files that I need to use. Okay, I've got other things here as well. I've got lots of videos here to choose from. I've got a final version. I've got some sound effects as well, and I've got a little graphic as well. So I'm just going to drag and drop all of this stuff in there. Okay, what you should have then in your project area is a lot of different files. I've got my MP4 files, which are my video files. I've got those sound files, and I've got that little graphic as well. These are compositions. These are what I've made earlier compositions, and we're just going to have a quick look at those now. Okay, so as you can see here, you've got this first composition. This first composition is the first part of your project. This is where you're going to be rotoscoping and providing foreground and background for your shots. So we'll just have a quick look at this and work out what everything is. So at the bottom is a video file. Above that is a PNG. It is the ground cracks, that is the graphic. Above that is another version of this video file, and then we have some shape layers and things like that. Okay, so what I've done is I've gone a little bit further with this than you're going to do. I've tried to add a little bit of smoke and stuff like that as well, but we won't have time for you to do that in this tutorial. Okay, so at this stage, if we were to go through this, we have one version of the video file that has been rotoscoped, okay, and then I'm able to play around with that and provide movement. You can see the movement here, positional movement being applied. So we're just using motion blur here to give the impression that someone is moving when they're really not. In the second composition, we have applied camera shake. Okay, this camera shake, can you see that? Very useful. Alright, so there's a difference there. You've just got a little bit of shake, etc. That's why we make a second composition. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our first composition. Take your video file and you want to create a composition based on that video file. It's important to have the right frame rates and everything like that attached. So what we can do is we can click and grab one of these files. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take that background file and we're going to drop it onto this icon here that allows us to create a composition based on that video file. Okay, so you can see my new composition here. We're also going to add in Tom as well, just at the top there. Okay, now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be cutting Tom out of the original footage around him so that he appears on the background footage. So let's begin. You want to find on your tools at the top here the roto brush. Okay, you can click on that, but you're not going to be able to see the roto brush until you have changed the area that you're working in. So to do that, you need to create a new window that is separate to the composition area. Double click the file that represents Tom, and there you are, you're in the layer area. Then you can see that the green brush has appeared now. If I press Alt, I have a red brush. Okay, if you hover over the red brush, it explains this. Drag over the foreground and then Alt drag over the background. So Tom is our foreground, that's what we want to keep. We're going to drag over him. Got a cold. So we are going through this. We can get to the end. So there you go. Notice what I've done is I've painted inside the image and I've not painted on the edge. That's important. The computer is going to recognize the colors that make up the area that you want to keep. Okay, and you can see what that's done there. It is going to struggle in areas that are the same color. So for example, Tom had a background of grey behind him and that is interfering with the shirt. So that's why I press Alt and that brings up the alternate roto brush tool, which is to remove parts of your rotoscope. Okay, so I can, with that Alt, hold it down, I can click and make some adjustments there, making sure that the computer knows where I'm going to be removing stuff. Notice his hair has not been picked up, so I can rectify that. I can remove my finger from Alt and I can add some more to the rotor brush. Okay, when I go back to the composition area, you should be able to see that Tom has been removed from his background and there's a background below, and there's some telltale signs for that. For example, can you see we're just cutting off some of his hair there, etc. There's a lack of detail around there, but it's looking good at the moment. But then you can see what we're actually left with. go back to your layer window, and you can see that you have along here, along this timeline, which is separate to your normal timeline, you can see that we have some data that's been held in this first frame, and then the computer has tried to render beyond that what you expect to see. Okay, so if you go along this, we should be able to see how the computer is able to understand, based on those roto brush strokes that you've made. You might find that you need to add some more roto brush strokes. Yeah, so you can see here I've got an area here that I could potentially sort out. So a good thing to do would be to reinforce, add another brush here, and then hold Alt and bring another brush stroke in there. The roto brush acts as an effect, and the effect sits within the effects area of the video that it's applied to. So you can see roto brush and refine edge. This is in the effects controls, and within there you can see all of the strokes that you have applied. There are quite a lot. They come up as these little ones, and it's a big list of them here. Okay, so each time it's going through the timeline, it's taking that data at that certain point and applying that. Yeah, so it's not loading at this point in time, it's struggling, so we'll just work that out. So that's all of the time that we need for it. That's not looking too bad, to be honest with you. Okay, first thing for us to do now is to animate this. We are going to just move Tom off screen and on screen. So a good thing to do would maybe to identify where Tom should drop to the floor, or your character should drop to the floor. When they hit the floor, can you see that? His foot has touched the floor there. So I'm going to use that as my starting point. Okay, so it's quite simple. If I was to go into the properties of this layer, I have access to lots of areas here, properties. Okay, in the transform properties, I have a position property. I'm going to just click the stopwatch, and then I'm going to move back on myself. I've made what we call a keyframe here. That is your starting point with any sort of animation. The brush strokes also act as keyframes, etc. That's everything that works within these areas are keyframes. Okay, so you have two position options here. One property is for left and right, and the other property is for up and down, and you can get to anywhere on the pixel grid with these. Okay, so this one is left and right. We don't need to use that one. It is this one here that you want to use. It's the vertical one. So I'm going to have Tom appear. So he's off screen first of all, and then he comes down to the floor like this. Okay, so that's already looking a bit better. I would pause the video and do that if I was you. Now there is no movement after this point in time, but what I want to do at some point in time is I want him to run off. But it's at what point do I do that? I would say at this point here, where his foot's just touching there, I can add another keyframe. And it's important to do that. To get to that spot, you need another keyframe, and there is no movement in between these two keyframes. He's running off, but we're just going to give him a little bit of a hand. We're going to add a keyframe, and this time not by clicking this button, but by moving him from left to right. Okay, now these beads, these act as frames. They show you how many frames is being used. Okay, so that's all we're doing. But we've got our background there. If we go back to my composition, you can see that I've actually used the video file as it was intended, using a tilt down. Okay, so we've got that right at the end there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just move my footage to the point where that happens, and we're going to then time it so that works with what we've got. So I'm good thing to do potentially would be to actually press that time reverse layer, and there we go. I have what I want there, and that's what we need to have there. Okay, when does the tilt finish even? It's about there. So on this point, I'm going to click and drag that mouse to the point where Tom drops down, and we'll see what that looks like. What I've had to do with the original composition is I've actually sped up that footage, and I've used blurs and stuff like that to do that. Okay, I'll show you just very quickly how to speed up that footage. If you right click footage, you'll be able to add this enable time remapping. We can click on that, and then that gives you something else that you can play with. Okay, so that allows me to actually speed up this tilt. So I can click the stopwatch here, I can go along, and here where we have that movement, pop that another another keyframe there, and then if I was to move the keyframes closer together, all of that happens a lot quicker. That's the same thing that's happening there, but I've just taken a bit more time. Another thing to do at this stage would be to add some blur effects. Okay, so go to the effects controls, and in here, well, with a video selected, with a file selected, right click in the effects controls, you can add a blur. So a blur that I like to use, it's really useful, is directional blur. You've got the dial here that allows you to change the direction, but you won't be able to see any blurring on your subject until you increase the blur length. Okay, and these themselves can also be animated as well, so you can see that there. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into my effects layer here and close any other effects so I can get my directional blur, and then I can animate this. So from this point in time, he's about to hit the floor, and when you finish with your movement, that's when you want to reduce the blur length. Okay, so I'm just going to click the stopwatch here. That creates our first keyframe. That keyframe is under the impression that you want full length blur of 25, but as he hits the ground, we're going to quickly bring that down to 0. Yep, those two keyframes are very close together, but if you zoom in using these little mounting tops here, you can see a difference there. So here we go, there you go, and it's fairly seamless. Yeah, keyframe here, and then increase the blur length once again to signify that you have movement. So that'll play out, and you have the blur there, and then on the end you have your blur there as well. One thing that we have to do as well that I haven't done is I need to change the direction. So at this any point here, I can click on the direction key stopwatch to start it, and then I can move the marker along, and then I can change the direction. So if I were to just do that, we've got the movement there that happens quite quickly. What's stopping you from selecting the background and adding that blur again? We want to animate it as well, but you can see the difference it makes. So where do we have the fast movement? You can see during time remapping we've got that there, and so I can click on there, add that keyframe, move along to the other side, and remove that blur. And then again, you want to go into the blur effect so that you have more chance to see keyframes and stuff like that. Put it there. You can move out and bring that down. Yeah, I've downloaded a little item here. If I was to drag this on here, you can see what this is. This is a animated graphic, or it's not animated, in fact, it's simply a PNG image. Okay, I would put that on there at that point in time, but it's not going to look good. I can also like reduce how much it's actually seen on screen, but it's not going to be useful until I actually animate it. Okay, so one thing I can do is I can create a mask for this. Okay, so masks are very useful. They work very similar to how rotoscoping works, as in you are showing the object and you're cutting out bits that you don't want. To make a mask, you can have a layer selected that holds an item within it, and then you can click on the pen tool. Okay, click on that. If you want to make things easier for yourself, you can choose the Roto Bezier option that creates curved lines. But either way, what you're doing is you're creating a shape, much like you would do on a program like Photoshop or something like that. Now, what this does is this reveals bits in the middle and subtracts the bits on the outside. But that can be swapped around if you ever wanted to do that. You can click inverted and then that would happen. Within this though, you have masking options. Okay, so again, you've created an element much like the roto brush, and then it's appearing in these properties. You've added extra properties to a layer. Here you can feather the mask, and you can expand the mask as well. And we're going to do a few of these. So first of all, we're going to feather the mask. So we are going to just fade out the edges a little bit, and then we're going to expand the mask as well. Okay, so if we start with a starting point and click the stopwatch, we could then move on and then expand it out. Yeah, and so then that's going to show as something that appears as he hits the floor. So that happened a little bit too late for our liking, so we can move that along. One thing that you will need to do is you'll need to move this below Tom, and so you can see a change there in the feet. Now, one thing to take into account is that in this footage you actually have a little bit of more movement and stuff like that, so this is going to work very effectively with this footage. Yeah, and I would have played around with that so that it's a bit better. Yeah, but even then you can see a bit of movement there. Yeah, there's other things you could do. You could use your time remapping to essentially pause the background footage. You don't need any more movement at this point in time, but just bear in mind that the trees and things like that will stop moving, the leaves and stuff like that. So let's just show you how to do that very quickly. On that background footage, we've already played around with time remapping, and you can see that there we've sped up that footage. But if I was to take this keyframe, copy that, so Control C, and then paste it at the end there, there's then going to be no more movement. Yeah, so that's the difference there. Yeah, when you are working with a first composition, you then create a new composition with that stuff included. Okay, so you can see in my list here you've got composition 1, which is actually this composition that's being used in this area. We then have a camera on top, and we have all of these sounds. All you need to worry about for camera shake is these two here, so we're going to do that now. So my composition for Tom, this tutorial one, is actually called P1100476, and that's just indicating the name of a bit of footage. What we're going to do is we're going to take this composition, as you can see here, it's got a clear icon here, composition 1, composition 2, we've got this one here as well. We're going to click and drag this over to here once, like we did before. We're going to add that in, and then we've got our new composition. We're going to right click just in the empty space here and select new camera, press OK on that. It shouldn't matter. Yeah, what you've got to do is you've got to select everything as a 3D layer. Okay, so make sure that anything within this area is used as a 3D layer, and then we'll be able to play around with this. Okay, so the camera now represents what the audience will see. Okay, and so this footage is now a 3D object within that space, and it will have things like full rotation on the X, Y and Z axes. So if I was to do that, you can see that it's actually turning on itself there. Yeah, it's almost like it can be floating in space or something like that, you know. That's what we end up playing around with. Yeah, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to mess around with the transform options of the footage. To make some shaking, what you need to do is you need to essentially make this composition a little bit bigger, bring the frame up so that the edges are taken away, and then we're going to literally just shake it. And because it's been made bigger, the shaking's never going to make it come across the screen as if it would like this, you know. So we'll show you how that works. So increase the scale. That's what you do to start with. When you have to go through this, you're going to want to identify where exactly how you want to frame things. Yeah, and at this point in time you could mess around and change the position if you wanted to, but we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it a different way. I'm going to show you expressions, and it's a bit complicated, but it should be easy to grasp once you've tried it out. So you hold Alt, that's the left Alt, and you click on the stopwatch of the property you want to change. And here, this is position. We're going to click on this, and then that brings up a expressions area, and this acts like a line of code. And what we're going to do is we're going to write just a little bit of code. It's pretty simple. We're going to create a wiggle expression. So wiggle, and then you can create your first expression there, which is wiggle. Okay, now within these brackets you need to provide 2 bits of data. Okay, it is the level of wiggle you want to create, okay, but also how often the wiggle is shown. So we'll try that out. We're going to go we're going to just say 20 for the amount, and then 15 for the how many times like per second it does it, or something like that. Okay, and you can see what it's doing there. It's giving the impression that everything's shaking, and then if I was to change those numbers, you should be able to see a difference there. So let's whack it up to 60 and see what that does. There you go. So you can see a difference there. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking one of these numbers, and we're going to be providing a chance to animate it using a slider. In your effects section, you can find it just on the side here, where you could right click and add it here. You should be able to find a slider tool. So I've searched for that. When you search for it and find that, you can click and drag that onto your composition layer, and then it's not doing anything. It's there, and you can see it within your effects there, but it's not doing anything, because what you need to do is you need to add it to this area. Okay, and you don't need to type out any more code, but you do need to, say for example, get rid of one of these, okay, numbers, and then whilst the text reticle is still there, you can click and hold and drag the expression pick whip to the slider. So we'll do that now, and this will what it look like. Click, hold, drag to the slider, and then all of this comes up. Effect, slider control, slider. Okay, that's what it's looking for. Okay, now you've got one number. You used to have two. You've got one number, and then you've got the slider. That slider is a number, isn't it? Okay, so if I was to have the number at 0 of this slider, you can see you've got no movement anymore. The camera is not moving. There's no shake. But if I was to whack this up, you can see that you've got loads of shake. That's far too much at this point in time. Put it up to 230. But even put it up to 10, it's going to give you some shake there, and you can see how that plays out. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly animate this. Okay, this is a an effect. It has its own line. It can be keyframed now. Okay, so say for example I start with that. I'm going to go back on myself so that I can gradually get to 10. I'm going to just type in 0 to make things easier, and then it's going to then provide me with a build up towards that shake. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to pop it in the right spot and maybe increase the level of it. I want to bring that in a little bit. Again, it's not perfect, but if you play around with it, you will get something that looks a bit better. So we've got just a little bit of shake there. You can see, if you're looking just at that leaf there, you can see how it moves around. And we've got even less shake at the end there, but it's just enough. Yeah. Now this composition is what we end up exporting now, because it has the camera there and it has everything else. If you look at the original version of this, the one that we've done earlier, this is where we've added sounds. Now sounds are pretty straightforward. You can upload them just as footage, much like you do in Premiere Pro. But when you play around with the sound files, you need to be aware that they act very similar to the video files as well, but you will struggle at times if you're rendering. You'll struggle at times to be able to hear it, etc. But it should be pretty straightforward. Go into it and you can see this waveform, and then say for example if I was to increase that out, you can see that I've actually got more sound files there. I don't need all of those portions of the sound file, so I've been quite selective, and so that sounds like, so that's one of those sounds that I've got. I've also got a few other sounds as well. So this one here is just this sound file. I know I do have these other waveforms here, but we've actually cut off the export to there, so it shouldn't matter. But either way, you can see that that is that almost gun sound. One other thing for you to do is once you've finished, you want to be able to export it. If you go File, Export, you are always guided to add this to the render queue. So you click on Add to Render Queue, and that's going to bring you into another area. You need to make sure that this is all set up ready to go. One thing that you will want to do is specify the output. If I click on that, I can go to my scratch drive, I can find the folder that I wanted to provide, and I can click save there. When I'm ready, I can click render.
Hey.
So what what you're going to see Carl do is he's going to jump in and land on the ground. He's going to hold that and then run off. So you can see here in the camera, I've got him framed there. And when you're ready, okay. Just that was a bad take.